The 12th Black Crusade, more widely remembered as the Gothic War, erupted in the final months of 142 M41. Long a bastion of imperial might in Segmentum Obscurus, the Gothic sector found itself engulfed in conflict. After centuries of using guile and treachery to attain his goals, the War Master of Chaos finally returned to his characteristic savagery. Amidst a rising tide of warp disturbances and civil unrest, the war began. Across the breadth of the sector, as the warp storms reached their peak, vox channels stuttered into silence and astropathic choirs fell mute. From across the stars, Chaos fleets struck without warning, plunging from the Empyrean like krakens from the void. They seized two artifacts of great power, the Hand of Darkness and the Eye of Night. Their next goal was the capture of the 6 Imperial Blackstone fortresses. It was up to Lord Admiral Cornelius von Ravensburg to stop them. If you want massive events like this for your tabletop RPG campaigns, you might have noticed you can't really do it with something like D&D, but you will be able to with our sponsor today, Grit and Glory. This is a new TTRPG system that will let you have the adventure you really want, by massively reducing the restrictions and assumptions built into the game's rules. Essentially, the rules and caps will be carefully relaxed, such that you can be a lone survivor scavenging in a forest, up to an interstellar warlord capturing fortresses from the Empire of Mankind. And along the way, all the usual rules about character growth, items, magic use, healing, leveling, they're all getting an overhaul to break the limits of D&D, so the format can finally go to the places players really want it to. Check out the Grit and Glory YouTube channel for dives into what exactly they want to improve from the D&D formula, and more importantly, the Kickstarter to bring the Grit and Glory rulebook to fruition is launching today as this video comes out, so you can head to the link in the description and learn everything about Grit and Glory and pledge to bring it to your tabletop adventures. You can also track their progress on every social media feed under the sun. All the links will be in the description to keep up with Grit and Glory and get involved. Check it all out today. For all his fervour and capabilities, Admiral Ravensburg was overwhelmed. The opening stages of the Gothic War played decisively in the archenemy's favour. The Gothic sector had been cut off from the rest of the Imperium by vast warp storms that crippled communication, isolated worlds, and rendered reinforcement impossible. Astropathic messages either failed to arrive or returned days later, garbled by the fury of the Empyrean. No new ships could be deployed from Segmentum Command. No tithed reinforcements from neighbouring sectors could come to his aid. The Segmentum Obscurus stood in silence, and the Gothic sector was left to fend for itself. Von Ravensburg would have to fight Abaddon with what he had, and what he had was far from sufficient. His fleet had been stretched thin before the war even began, scattered across distant patrol routes, mired in suppressing rebellions, or undergoing refit in now compromised dockyards. Whole battle groups were out of position, responding to unrest that now revealed itself to have been orchestrated as part of the War Master's strategy. Fuel reserves were dwindling, repair crews were overworked, and officers were exhausted. There would be no strategic depth and no fallback positions. Every man, woman, and vessel under von Ravensburg's command would be forced to hold the line, not for victory, but for survival. Unfortunately for the Loyalists, the War Master was far from the only threat they had to worry about. As soon as the first salvos of the war were fired, piratical activity across the Gothic sector reached record heights. Legions of lowly dregs of humanity, long dormant in the shadows of the Imperium's trade lanes, emerged to exploit the chaos. For every disciplined Chaos warband, there was a dozen rabble fleets of cutthroat opportunists, smugglers, deserters, void corsairs, and ancient trader dynasties gone rogue. They struck for plunder, slaughter, and the raw thrill of defiance. Most of these vagabonds were not even followers of the Chaos Gods. They lacked the piety, if such a word could be used, of true heretics. They were not apostles of the Dark Pantheon, but petty, self-serving ruffians, all too happy to cripple their own species for short-term gain. They sacked supply convoys, looted merchant flotillas, and set upon defenseless outposts with wild abandon. Often, their attacks came just hours after Chaos raids, scavenging among the wreckage like vermin. In the brief interludes between major fleet engagements, they were a constant thorn in the side of Battlefleet Gothic. Too small to hunt en masse, too numerous to eradicate, and always eager to fill the void left by the retreat of Imperial authority. Their very existence served Abaddon's ends perfectly, to paralyze the sector with fear, fracture its cohesion, and bleed it dry before the killing blow. Yet human pirates were by far the least of Ravensburg's concerns. A far more pressing issue was the obvious presence of Xeno privateers. The first and easiest to identify were the Orc freebooters. Their unrefined and inelegant strategies left little to the imagination. Even when they left no survivors, it did not take a xenologist to identify the hallmarks of their attacks. The green-skinned brutes would hide their ramshackle vessels amid asteroid debris in the Cyclops cluster, and pounce on any convoy they could outfight, heretic or imperial. Though few in number, and certainly not enough to form a mighty war, they proved destructive to imperial logistics. Even more concerning, however, were the inhumanly swift strikes of what could only be Eldar corsairs. The human pirates had the numbers, the greenskins had the savagery, but the Eldar were unrivaled voidsmen. Despite being fewest in number by far, their preternatural mastery of void combat and maddening techno-sorcery could make 10 ships feel like 100. Normally, this elusive and treacherous race could at least be counted upon to oppose the forces of chaos, though no self-respecting Imperial would ever call them allies. They were simply too mercurial, arrogant, and fickle for that. Yet their incessant attacks on Imperial convoys in the middle of a Black Crusade were inexplicable, even for them. Despite von Ravensburg's attempts to contact them, they refused all communications and continued to harass loyalist forces. Imperial scholars and xenologists have surmised that an Eldar craft world must have been present in the nearby area. The most likely location was the Graildark Nebula, from which most of their attacks originated. Any vessel entering this zone, whether loyalist or heretical, was set upon by their lightning-fast vessels. This theory, however, has never been proven. Even so, it would explain the Eldar's uncharacteristic aggressiveness. Like a mother bear of old terror protecting her cubs, the Craftwelders were fiercely protective of their endangered homes. All three piratical groups targeted the same vulnerable lifelines of the Imperium. Collectively referred to as wolf packs by the Loyalists, they struck at the arteries that sustained Ravensburg's defences. No Imperial shipping lane, no Adeptus Mechanicus supply barge, and no fleet tender or Munitorum freighter was safe from their depredations. They struck with speed and cruelty, vanishing into the stars before retaliation could be mustered. Convoys disappeared without a trace. Voxcasters fell silent. The warp routes bled. Lord Admiral Ravensburg was captain of a ship sinking from 1,000 breaches. Even as the War Master's fleets hammered his defense lines, the wolf packs were gnawing at his foundations. Ammunition shipments were lost in transit. Food and water rationing became the norm. Replacement parts failed to arrive. Starving garrisons abandoned their posts or turned on one another. Every system he defended began to rot from within, devoured by these endless small-scale raids. The Lord Admiral simply did not have enough ships, men, or hours in the day to plug all the gaps. For every battle group he dispatched, 2 more systems cried out for aid. The situation was rapidly becoming untenable, and Abaddon aimed to make it worse. Concentrating his as-of-now scattered forces, Ezekiel launched a lightning assault on dozens of Imperial Navy dockyards. This sudden shift in focus, coupled by the crippled Imperial logistics, prevented von Ravensburg from reacting quickly enough. As precious Imperial war vessels lay at anchor, chaos struck. Dozens of docked warships were torn asunder by torpedoes, their crews still asleep in their bunks. The disaster was immeasurable. Many flagships belonging to Ravensburg's lieutenants, such as the Radamanthine or the Lord Sylvanus, were lost with all hands or severely crippled. Vital and ancient facilities such as Tripol Docks, Port Imperial, Gathara Station, or Halamnet Base all fell to the foe. One after the other, Imperial orbital stations fell silent. They were either methodically destroyed by the War Master or repurposed to serve the traitor fleets. Organization and logistical support had always been the bane of most Chaos incursions into real space. This time, however, Abaddon would make certain that his troops had a firmly established foothold in the region. Clearly, Abaddon had long planned this war, orchestrating a precise first strike that very nearly knocked his foe out in one shot. The Loyalists were dazed and bloodied. Yet, unfortunately for the War Master, they were certainly not beaten. Perhaps his previous experiences fighting the Imperium had lulled the despoiler into a false sense of security. If he thought warp storms, pirates, demons, and shattered dockyards were enough to knock Battlefleet Gothic out of the fight, he was about to be disappointed. Indeed, amidst the jaws of defeat, the brave Loyalists would manage to snatch some precious key victories. Though not yet enough to turn the tide, they would buy Ravensburg precious time to recover. The Orar Raid was undoubtedly the greatest of those early Imperial successes. This battle would be remembered for the heroism of the Navis Imperialis and would shatter the myth of invincibility surrounding the forces of chaos. At the time of Abaddon's mass assault on Imperial dockyards, the hive world of Orar was already on high alert due to nearby secessionist uprisings. Its own shipyards harboured a sizable battle group, under the capable leadership of Captain Compel Bast. The captain led his men from aboard his flagship, the Mars-class battlecruiser Imperius. This awesome testament to Martian ingenuity carried a formidable arsenal, which included a mighty Nova cannon, capable of destroying even the greatest of vessels in one strike. Earlier that day, Captain Bast had given the order to raise anchor and head out to crush the nearby uprising. His flotilla was accordingly on high alert when the Chaos forces had the misfortune of striking. Led by Malefica Arkham, a chosen of Abaddon and master of the Slaughter-class Deathbane, the Chaos vessels materialized near Orar. One can only imagine their shock when they laid eyes not on hapless prey, but on a fully armed and operational battle group. The Imperials, on the other hand, couldn't believe their luck. This was an Emperor-sent opportunity to punish a foe that had bled their beloved sector dry. As the Chaos Warfleet descended, their torpedoes met only empty void. The Imperius and her sister ships, already in combat readiness, counterattacked with discipline. The traitor vessels were torn apart in well-orchestrated strikes that would enter the textbooks of the Imperial Navy. Supported by the orbital defenses of Orar, the Loyalists had the advantage. Very few Chaos vessels managed to break off the engagement and escape the slaughter. Among the many prizes seized or destroyed that day was the mighty Slaughter-class cruiser Soulless, which was shattered by a direct Nova Cannon blast from the Imperius at the climax of the battle. The Death Skull, another Slaughter class, was also reduced to a hulk by bomber strikes. Even the Deathbane herself was grievously damaged by fire from the Iron Duke, although Arkham would escape to fight another day. Though this early victory was clearly the exception rather than the rule, it gave the brave men and women of the Imperial Navy a rallying cry. The forces of Chaos could be beaten, and the Emperor's faithful would see it so. Still, Abaddon was not idle. Even as the embers of Orar's triumph still smouldered, the War Master struck at the heart of Imperial pride. His warfleets, now consolidated and fully committed, descended upon the Rebo system. Here stood one of the 6 Blackstone fortresses, titanic bastions of alien origin, refitted by the Adeptus Mechanicus, and long regarded as impregnable. Known as Blackstone IV, this colossal relic orbited the 5th planet of Rebo, its armoured spine bristling with lance batteries and macro-cannon emplacements. No enemy had ever seized a Blackstone. To many, the very thought was heresy. That belief was shattered at Rebo 5. 20 Chaos capital ships breached the outer system defences with contemptuous ease. Among them were 2 Despoiler-class battleships and a swarm of escort vessels that scoured the void clean of resistance. The Imperial ships on station fought with everything they had. Veteran captains gave their lives without hesitation. The void burned with las fire and torpedoes as the defenders hurled themselves into a battle they knew they could not win. Their vessels were few, hastily repaired, and already worn thin by weeks of constant redeployment. For a brief moment, it seemed that they might buy enough time. Astropaths had already begun screaming into the ether for reinforcement. Then the disaster came, not from without but from within. The Chaos fleet entered the range of Blackstone IV's mighty guns. The beleaguered Imperial captains watched with anticipation, eager to see the dreaded battle station unleash retribution upon the foe. Then, suddenly, Blackstone IV simply shut down. Power grids flickered and died. Lance batteries and void shields went cold. Hangar doors remained sealed. Entire decks filled with attack craft fell into pitch darkness. A final astropathic transmission from within the fortress spoke to their desperation and confusion. In their greatest hour of need, it was as though the fortress itself had turned against its keepers. The defenders were slaughtered. Blackstone IV, long a symbol of Imperial supremacy in the Gothic sector, fell into the hands of the Despoiler without firing a single shot. This catastrophic turn of events was a turning point in the war. No matter how bad the situation got, von Ravensburg had always assumed he could rely on the Blackstone fortresses to stem the tide. The blow to morale was incalculable. Among the highest echelons of the Adeptus Mechanicus and the Inquisition, suspicion quickly turned to the ancient artifacts Abaddon had recovered earlier in the campaign, the Hand of Darkness and the Eye of Night. Individually, their power was dangerous. Together they were apocalyptic. Operating deep within the sector, Inquisitor Horst surmised that the artifacts had not only powered Abaddon's fleet, but enabled him to subvert the alien systems of the Blackstones themselves. The Imperium's greatest weapons in the Gothic sector could no longer be relied upon. And unfortunately for the Loyalists, the fall of Blackstone IV would not be the last such catastrophe. As the Imperial analysts struggled to understand what had happened, the War Master made his next move, keen on shattering his enemy's morale beyond recovery. His new weapon, simply called the Planet Killer, made its debut. This ship defied all known Imperial classification. One would have to go back to the hallowed days of the Great Crusade, or even the Dark Age of technology to find its like. Vast beyond reckoning, she dwarfed even the largest battleships in Segmentum Obscurus. Her silhouette, glimpsed in auger returns and picked recordings, was layered with lance batteries, torpedo racks, and banks of esoteric energy weaponry. She radiated power, not merely mechanical but warp-borne. Her first target was the doomed cardinal world of Savaven. The Planet Killer emerged from the warp and advanced on Savaven like a predator. The few defense craft stationed in orbit either fled or were annihilated without ceremony. Then came the weapon's opening, an energy beam emitted from a dozen apertures that lanced downward for 30 uninterrupted minutes. It seared through Savaven's crust, bored into the molten mantle beneath, and tore open the planet's own heart. What followed defied precise description. No Imperial survived to tell the tale. What little information reached the Loyalists came either from blurry orbital pict feeds or willing testimonies from delighted heretics. Magma surged to the surface in tsunamis of fire. Continents collapsed. Oceans vaporized. The polar caps detonated. The planet screamed and then was silent. Savaven broke orbit, its remains cast into an asteroid field that would haunt the Imperial star charts for millennia to come. 14 billion souls perished in a single hour. The psychological impact on the sector was catastrophic. It was known to many that mankind possessed the tools to kill planets. The Inquisition, the Adeptus Astartes, and many other Imperial groups possessed exterminatus-grade weaponry. Yet this was different. The thing which had destroyed Savaven was no cyclonic torpedo that simply wiped off any lifeform on the surface. It was a fully mobile ship of war, capable of annihilating an entire planet in less than an hour. Furthermore, there was no guarantee that the Planet Killer could not deploy her firepower in a conventional void battle. Against such an engine, von Ravensburg simply had nothing to offer that could possibly rival it. Across the void of space, silence fell. Men and women prayed and wept. Entire regiments went traitor. Vox transmissions from the region near Savaven ceased. Even battle-hardened fleet captains whispered of the Planet Killer with dread. The Emperor's tarot turned black. And yet, amid despair, the war did not end. It could not. For if Abaddon had intended to sow terror and force the Imperium into paralysis, he failed. In truth, the destruction of Savaven and the brutal efficiency of the Blackstone campaign steeled Lord Admiral von Ravensburg's resolve. If he were to face oblivion, then he would do so with honor. Already reeling from the losses at Orar, Halamnet and Rebo, the Imperial Navy dug in. What remained of the sector's loyalist commanders redoubled their efforts. Orders were dispatched in encrypted bursts, relayed by suicidally brave astropaths. Fleet groups, starved of fuel and ammunition, began raiding Chaos-held supply lines. Macro cannons were stripped from derelicts and reinstalled aboard smaller vessels. Penal legions were conscripted en masse to crew gutted ships. Every man, woman and child with the will to fight was called upon. Abaddon may have had the upper hand so far, but no creature in the entire galaxy could ever afford to underestimate the might of the Imperial Navy. In our next episode on the Black Crusades, the Imperium of Man will strike back. To ensure you don't miss that, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we will catch you on the next one.